Clemson, Nick, may not look so good after reading this. So this is how he explains it. Coach Bakich came running out of the dugout when the crew got together. We told him to go back to the dugout while we huddled. We had to tell him 3 times to return to the dugout. Meanwhile, Coach Leggett was in the dugout pointing and screaming at us about the crew huddling. Leggett was warned to stop. He continued waving his hands while yelling at the crew. At this point, Leggett was ejected for failing to obey the warning. He then proceeded onto the field in foul territory and was warned to leave or be suspended. Leggett continued to yell at us while walking towards us and failing to obey the prolonged warning. Leggett was issued a 2-game suspension. Once Leggett was ejected, Coach Bakich, who had not returned to the dugout, stayed outside the dugout in foul territory and started raising his arms over his head while facing the crowd to clearly incite the crowd. Due to the previous unsportsmanlike conduct warning issued earlier, we deemed this inappropriate and he would be ejected for his actions. We ultimately decided that the batter's actions were not an ejectable offense. The crew chief met with Coach Bakich at the foul line to give him an explanation. He was told Leggett had been ejected and suspended for coming out of the dugout and onto the field and failing to obey the prolonged warning. He was then told he was going to be ejected for not returning to the dugout and for inciting the crowd. After the ejection, Bakich followed the crew chief several times around the infield, and after being warned for prolonged activity, he has been suspended for failing to obey the warning. The game continued and ended without further incident.
Maybe he was just trying to get the crowd going because they weren't bringing the juice in an important day.
And remember, that all happens, especially when he's told that we're not going to eject the hitter. They're up.
Yeah.
Clemson is winning the game. And I'm sure in that moment you're not thinking, hey, if the score holds, I can't coach the first 2 games in the College World Series. I may not be able to coach 1 game in the College World Series, even though my team qualified in case, if they go 2 and Q. It's now given me that statement right there is also shedding a little bit more light on why it did take forever. Because, and you remember Eric Bakich trying to get to the crew chief and the home plate umpire trying to keep him away. So, I mean, based on his account, that does sound pretty accurate on what we were watching on TV. But I go back to, and maybe this is what it is, Gary. Maybe it's because you do have Jack Leggett in the dugout. He's a legend. He's somebody that everybody in the Clemson baseball circles embrace. He's part of your staff of player development that you feel like, well, it's going to look really good if that guy gets tossed, that I stand up for him.
Yeah.
And I raise a whole big ruckus about everything that's going on, and I'm going to look even better with my fan base. Damn, here I go. It's Eric Bakich time. It's prime time for Eric Bakich's douchebaggery moments. And it was. I'm sorry. Him pumping up the crowd in his form-fitting uniform. Dude, we get it. You work out, okay?
You don't like people that raise the roof?
He's no looping.
Oh, I shook my head and I just thought, boy, this is really on brand with Eric Bakich. Now, I said this earlier in the show, and I'll stand by it. I did like the move of when Crichton got tossed earlier in the game from leaving his position, that he didn't agree with it, that he said, hey, I'm going to have him come out and you can throw him out because I'm not going to throw him out. I actually liked that move. But then Eric Bakich happened, is all I'm saying. Whether we're talking about hidden ball tricks or we're talking about Eric Bakich just being that guy. He was that guy. And I honestly do wonder if part of that was posturing because Jack Leggett got thrown out first. And so he had to join him. Well, if Jack Leggett does it, then they're going to, if I don't get thrown out, then they're going to ask, am I as passionate as Jack Leggett is? Well, I can't let that happen. Again, I just think this is so funny. You let your emotions absolutely elude you in a game you're winning. And you know that they are now warranting a suspension for 2 games, and you're winning that game that would put you into the College World Series. To me, that's just not good judgment.
Hey, you know what I wanted to hear? I would have loved to have been field level because I got to imagine both of those head coaches don't like each other. There's a lot of rivalries in college baseball. Locally we know there are rivalries in the dugout between the blue and the red team. But you have Kevin O'Sullivan on one side and Eric Bakich on the other. Can you imagine the chirping that was going on?
Oh,
Delaying the game and arguing
Yep.
and other tactics that were going on. Where remember they also checked the pitcher for Clemson that he may have had something on the bill of his cap.
Yep. This is all so, and I go back to Eric Bakich when he was at Michigan. I can only speak on behalf of the Nebraska interaction, but I know there.
Go ahead, say it.
Oh, there's just those little things.
Will couldn't stand him.
Well, Darren was not a fan either. Darren was not a fan. And it was a lot of those little things that Eric Bakich does that I think there are a lot of people in the game, whether at a managerial level, a coaching level, or even as players, that think that it's kind of Mickey Mouse, that there's some Bush League things that he doesn't mind employing onto his team. And if you're going up against a team who is a little bit more old school, and we know Darren is, you don't like that stuff. And I think of Kevin O'Sullivan, who I don't want to say Kevin O'Sullivan is completely old school, grizzled, and is someone who doesn't like to pull those types of antics. But you also have a guy who came from the Big Ten, who's now with Clemson, very well-known baseball program, that there's probably a little bit of that "who the hell are you" type feeling if you're Kevin O'Sullivan. So, oh yeah, and Kevin O'Sullivan, as you know, Gary, he's not afraid to let you know what he's thinking, whether it's in the heat of the moment or it's before or after a game. So I guarantee you that those interactions throughout the game between those two coaching staffs and Kevin O'Sullivan was probably amazing.
And whether Sully rubs you the wrong way or not, you got to give him his due. I mean, the man knows how to coach college baseball. It's I don't know. The reaction towards him, I think, has changed after this run of 4 straight games in which they've won over the number 2 seed. So we are down to one spot is open. It's the all SEC, ACC College World Series. There is no Stony Brook. There is no Evansville. There are some newbies, like Kentucky will be here fun, and we'll be here for the first time, and that'll be a lot of fun. And they already, if I'm seeding the 7 that are here with the Rocco's Jello Shot board, I got Kentucky as a 1 seed, Tennessee is a 2, Florida State's a 3, Florida's a 4, North Carolina's a 5, Texas A&M a 6, and Virginia is a 7. Now, if Georgia wins, then we will change the seedings. But that's my seedings for the Jello Shot board. But the fact of the matter is the ACC and the SEC are here. And Jeff writes into the Equitable Bank inbox, ACC, SEC will dominate the College World Series in the future. I will miss the mix of teams from different parts of the country, but there is no going back. Can't disagree. Right. The Big 12 the Big 12 won't have a team here for the first time in 11 years. But remember, they get Arizona next year that joins the Big 12. So SEC, ACC, Big 12 will still have a place. And you want to add college baseball scholarships. We want to decrease football rosters and in turn give baseball most scholarships. I think that is scary for what the SEC and the ACC, which has only won 2 national titles, by the way. Take out Miami. I'm not, since Miami has joined the ACC, they haven't won a title, but you have Wake Forest in 55 and then Virginia in 15. So it has been all SEC, and you're going to give them extra scholarships? They're going to eat up college baseball, which leads me to this point. Of the last 2 weeks of college baseball, and it is such a geographical advantage sport. There is no doubt. When you begin the season in Lincoln, Nebraska, or in Omaha, Nebraska, and the first day of college baseball, there's snow on the ground, it's 33 degrees, that's awful tough to play.
Yep.
So those challenges are built in. It makes me appreciate the run that UConn has had, because UConn in Storrs, Connecticut, under Jim Penders has been really, really consistent. And they knocked on the door of the College World Series this year, and they had a great game too. They got drubbed in game 1, but kind of like Creighton treated UConn in men's basketball here in Omaha. That's how Florida State treated Creighton or UConn in baseball on Friday. But they had a great game on Saturday, got to extra innings, but then lost, and their season is over. Makes me really appreciate what UConn baseball is doing right now with how consistently they are in the conversation coming from Storrs, Connecticut. But this type of a field for the College World Series, I think we need to get used to it.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, and for people who are holding out hope for Big Ten teams, mainly Nebraska or even Creighton, you're looking at some type of glimmer of hope that sometimes change can lead to more opportunities for those teams to compete at the bigger stage or have that ability to impact recruiting or whatever it is. The simple math does not work in favor for them, because if you're talking about certain players that maybe a Nebraska or a Michigan or an Indiana or a Maryland get, a lot of those players might have had SE schools on their list, but there was a scholarship limitation that, well, they didn't necessarily make the cut. They couldn't go full end. They couldn't be part of 30 to 35
Yes.
scholarships. That all of a sudden, those players that you would have gotten at Maryland or Nebraska that had SEC schools on their list, but they quite frankly couldn't offer them a full scholarship, so they went elsewhere. Well, now that's not going to be a problem.
Yep.
So those types of players are going to be more readily available for the ACC and SEC teams. So this is the challenge for Will Bolt, for everybody that is in that similar position that Big Ten Northern Climate teams are. And I don't know the answer to this, but what you've been doing in recruiting and your creativity when it comes to selling your school, selling your product. This goes back to something, Gary, I'll give you credit for bringing up a while back. And this takes time to establish, mind you, but this is where your school has to be not about the conference, not even associated, where people think of, we'll use Nebraska baseball. They don't associate with Big Ten baseball. They associate with good winning baseball. And, I think UConn is a great example of that. I know Coastal's in a much more favorable climate, but I think Coastal Carolina is another program like that too, where you don't even think of the Sun Belt Conference, but you think of that program at its own. Hell, in a way, it's kind of how Gonzaga established themselves in college basketball. You
Yep.
don't think of where they're playing. You just think of that program as a winning program. How you do it, though, now where it is going to be unlimited scholarships at that roster size, that creates such a bigger challenge that I have no idea how you're able to go about that, other than you've got to string together winning seasons and be able to at least say, hey, we know we're not the SEC, we know we're not the ACC, but we're in the tournament every year and we're getting some guys into Major League Baseball. There's that. And then what can you do with NIL? I mean, that's going to be another big part of this too, is the name, image, likeness that you can try to provide. Even if you can't offer them a scholarship, can you be at least remotely competitive to what they do, especially in the SEC with NIL?
It also shows you, I keep going back to this, when you are in Lincoln, Nebraska or Omaha, Nebraska, and you got to hire a baseball coach and you know the challenges that you have, you got to be really good in that dugout.
Yeah.
I mean, you have to be good at putting a staff together, managing a roster, recruiting the right guy, developing them, and then you got to be really good inning 1 through 9.
Yep.
When you're the guy that's got the lineup card in your hand. So it makes moving forward, as the landscape of college baseball is going to change a bit. And I don't think there's, I don't think it's going to be drastically, we're going to go, oh my gosh, Big Ten baseball is here. We get Oregon, who was on the cusp of, going to the College World Series this year, or UCLA or Washington or USC. I think it is what it is. Maybe with a slight tweak and maybe an extra team or two would get into the tournament, but you got to be damn good in that dugout. So you got also have to, it would also help to have athletic directors that have an interest in baseball, make a commitment to baseball, and either are a baseball person or trust baseball people, that when you have an opening, they direct you towards the right person for your program. If that be an Andy Sawyers, who is one of the top candidates for the Creighton job, former Nebraska assistant, who went to Fayetteville with SEMO and beat Arkansas, eliminated Arkansas last week. You got to make the right hire for Northern schools in the dugout. Minnesota made a hire after John Anderson retired. They hired a young guy off of their staff, and he's making good hires with who he's putting together. So it adds to your head coach needs to be really good. Jim Penders at UConn has been really, really good. As a result, they're getting closer out of the Big East Baseball Conference to get to the College World Series.
The one interesting part about the hire, and I'm glad you bring up a guy like Sawyers, who coached in Nebraska, coached at K-State. He's been a part of those types of teams that have similar challenges. That the one area that I will be really curious, because I think it changes a lot in football. I think it changes a lot in basketball. I'm not sure how much it changes in baseball when it comes to recruiting. Because, yeah, there's always going to be an NIL element to it. But think about how players are how they appear on the radar of college baseball teams and coaches. I mean, you have your different showcase tournaments and showcase camps, but you also have just doing the legwork that, I mean, coaches have been doing for, decades, where they're grinding out summer Legion baseball schedules and they're going out to this place and that place. I don't know if any of that really changes. And I think that's where more so from the cooler weather climate teams, the Big Tens of the world, the Big East teams of the world, when you're able to find, I don't even call them a hidden gem, but the less known talent because you are putting in that legwork, that's another area that if I'm an athletic director and I'm valuing and knowing that we just don't have a bevy of talent that is so fixated on wanting to go to our school right in our own backyard, who has a track record, whether you're a recruiting coordinator, an assistant coach, you were one of the lead recruiters, and who are the types of guys that you were able to pull in? Who are those guys also looking at other schools that you were able to win them over? How did you do that? I want to know more about that, because I don't think what maybe you did 10 years ago is necessarily changed. I think that still is a really big part of putting together the type of roster that you could at least hope is able to stay afloat, be competitive, be in a postseason, and then you just never know. I think that part of it as well from a coach is extremely important.
All right. Speaking of coaches, Tennessee, Texas A&M, Florida have 3 head coaches who are very polarizing. Chris writes into the Equitable Bank inbox about Sully yesterday and his move late in the game against Clemson. I thought it was pretty bush league to check the pitcher at that point in the game. It was the top of the 10th. Kid had already thrown 77 pitches. That wasn't gamemanship. It was BS.
Oh, it was.
Oh, that's a Sully move.
Yep. That's why I said Kevin O'Sullivan is not a guy that is beyond Bush League or if he's above any of that stuff. No. He's just been doing it longer.
Yeah, and he's been to the College World Series now in the last 14 years.
Yes,
he's got a title as well. All right, Evan Bland coming up in about 35 minutes. Jacob Bigelow in an hour.